Hello and welcome to Lutys Chainsaw Mods. I thought I'd do a thing today on the CS580, uprating the carburettor from the standard 18mm carburettor to the 22mm Husqvarna 372 carburettor. I have seen videos on doing this before, but on the CS580, the Chinese Husqvarna clone, trust me, there's a lot more that you need to do to get this to actually function. So I'm going to be talking about that, but first of all, I'd like to quickly have a quick rundown on the issues I've had with these CS580 Husqvarna clone Chinese saws. Obviously they're very cheap saw. You can pick them up between 70 and about, say, £100, £110. They're 58cc and they're really good saws, but they are a bit underpowered compared to the more expensive Stills and proper Husqvarnas. But at the moment I'm getting this one now, so it's really up to those kind of levels. You know, I think she's pushing probably over 4 brake horsepower, probably close to 5 brake horsepower now, this saw, and that's with the standard carburettor. So I'm going to be putting the 372 carburettor on and going to go a bit better. Now the issues that you will always get with these saws, because they are so cheap, you need to be able to maintain the saw yourself and get round the problems. I do run a couple of Stills and I haven't really had any problems with them. They're pretty good, like, but I mean, me MS362C, I mean, you're looking at £1,000 for one of them. Whereas, like I say, these, I mean, this particular one I picked up for £80 brand new. I've had this one for 15 years. It's running its second cylinder bore and piston now, but the actual engine itself, they're really good engines. I mean, when you look inside, the transfer ports on these are wide open. There's no sort of they're not tunneled like all the Stills. Well, the MS362 is, they've got tunneled transfer ports, and obviously it can cause a bit of restriction. You know, they're sort of less likely to be able to tune as good as one of these. These are fully open transfer ports. They're basically grooves cut in the bore. So you can do a lot with these. So yeah, she's 15 years old. She's on his second piston and bore, still running really well. So because this is my oldest CS580 that I've got a couple of others, but they're younger than this. This is the one I've been modifying. It completely eats up the other two that I've got with power. It's a great saw, like. And now I've got around all the issues that I'm about to talk about. It's really reliable. So anyway, the first problem you always have with these, because I've had it with all mine and I know other people that have had the same problem, is they'll stop oiling onto the chain. Now, I tried different oils. I tried proper chain oil. That was probably worse. Proper chain oil is a bit like honey. It's really sticky and thick because it sticks to the chain. That's the idea of it. I actually use just cheap motor oil, and I find that they're perfect on that. But what you need to do with them when you first get one of these is take your oiling cap off and get a sort of a hook device like this and hook out your filter. then you need to get some sort of sharp implement, and where the filter is, you need to make the holes a little bit bigger by poking a sharp implement through them. A lot of people is going to say, oh well, you know, it's going to let bits in. Now the inside of these oiler pumps, you're looking at, they can easily cope with 2mm pieces of dust. They'll cope with that, they'll pump it through the whole system, no bother. I mean, me 017 that I've got, that one blocked up not long after I had that, and it was only a few little bits in it. It's a tiny pump on those, but this is like it's a copy of the Husqvarna, so a Husqvarna oil pump will fit, but the Chinese ones are pretty much as good, as long as you don't buy them too cheap. I made the mistake once. I bought one for £2 from China, and it had no O-rings on it, and it had no groove to fit O-rings. So what I did, initially I bought another one, but in the meantime I cut a ring in the piston inside the pump with a hacksaw and put an improvised O-ring on it, and it worked fine. You know, they're robust. So you don't have to worry about it letting bits in, because it will pump them through. But if you don't do that, the oil will not pass through the filter, and then it just will stop oiling. So that's one thing you need to do. The second thing I did, I had trouble with it misfiring at one point when I'd first had it. Now the standard ignition switch is there. When you pull it out, it's got soldered wires on it, on the switch, and if you just look inside there, there's actually the aluminium casing. And what it was doing, when this is fitted in standard like that and pushed in, the backs of the wires are very close to the aluminium casing inside. So what mine was doing, it was obviously shorting out on the casing and misfiring it under high revs. So what I did, I left that switch in, disconnected the wires off, relocated a switch here onto the pull start casing, and it's been fine ever since. So I got around that problem. That's now the next problem I've had. One of my CS 580s, I fired it up, it kicked back, and basically, if you can see there, it pushed the middle of this casing in when it kicked back. Now the reason it does that, this here isn't a real grommet, rubber grommet. All that is a plastic copy of a rubber grommet. I mean, I suppose you might be able to hawk it out somehow, I don't know, and put a rubber grommet in it, which would have been fine, because ultimately, you know, it smashed my casing. I've had to have a new casing. So it was one of the other saws it did it on. Now early on I was worried about this issue, and this being my first one, what I did with this one is I put a spring and a washer in the end there, pulled the rope through, tied a knot on it. So now it's got, if you can see there, it's got a spring loaded handle, and this one's never had a problem. It's been fine. The other saw that I've got, another one over here, what I've done with this one is I've put a rubber ring just inside the cut a piece of rubber hose, basically put a piece of rubber underneath, so it this, so that it gives it a bit of cushioning, and at the same time, there it is, actually there's the rubber falling down there. Yeah, so piece of rubber hose, and also just around the bottom there I put a little rubber o-ring, so it just provides some cushioning, so if it does slam back down, you know, it shouldn't damage the casing. This is the one I had to replace the casing on, that's why this casing's a little bit of a different colour. So those are sort of the main problems that you'll have. You'll always have problems like that with these saws, but once you've got round those problems, because all of my saws have had those problems, I've never had any other issues with them. They've been really good and reliable. You know, I haven't had to change a coil on one of them, never had a piston fail. Yeah, they're really good. So back to changing this, uprating this carburetor. Now, as you can see, that's the original carburetor, 18mm in there. That is the Husqvarna 372 carburetor, 22mm, which should make a big difference. But what I will have to do eventually, my inlet port, it's really quite big on them, you know, that's the size of your inlet port, but this is the inlet manifold. Now if you just look at that, look how restrictive it is there. You know, it's really restrictive, and I mean, you can't really get your little finger inside, although the other end is, you know, really decent. You get your thumb in there quite easily, so it's really restrictive here. So what I'm going to do eventually is I'm going to have a go at making a new manifold, inlet manifold. Now it's got to be rubber mounted like this, because of the way the engine moves and vibrates and everything. So what I'm probably going to do is make a couple of plates up, weld some stubs on, and then join it with a piece of rubber. I mean, it's only theory at the moment, but I'm going to see if I can do that to try and get around that problem, because I know that will hold it back. Even so, apparently these carburetors, these 372 Husqvarna carburetors, really do improve the power on these saws. I've talked about this before, but the ram stack, I've had to modify this one slightly more, because this ram stack was running on the 18mm carburetor, so I've had to grind this ram stack out a little bit more to get it to actually fit properly and work on the Husqvarna 372 carburetor. Okay, so I've got it automatic. It will work. Now the only thing I did do when I had to open up a little bit more is I went through the casing slightly. Just around here, because obviously when I was grinding up inside there it went through. But what I've done, I've basically mixed up some like araldite and put it all around here, just to cover up any of there was only a couple of little holes, but there was, so it's covered them up. It's still pretty strong. It's, you know, it's strong enough to hold, basically it's holding a tiny little plastic air filter, you know, so it's strong enough. So yeah, now if you don't, you will have to open this up, purely because otherwise you will not clear the choke flap. The choke flap won't open and close properly, okay? So you've got to open it up more. Now the other thing as well, I found when I mounted it on, the carburetor wouldn't fit properly in here because the Husqvarna is wider than the CS580 carburetor. So what you have to do to get around that, you take this little rubber damper off. You have to chop a little bit off there. See, a lot of people are saying, oh well, all you've got to do, you've got to just knock this little clip off the linkage and in it'll go type of thing, right? Well, that's not the case. You will have to cut that off, and I think I took about, here's the piece I cut off, but I cut it off with a 2mm cutting disc, so you're probably looking at 4mm altogether. You've got to take off it, otherwise basically that sticks out. This part here sticks out of the saw, you won't get the top casing on. But it's easy enough to do. So that has to be modified throughout, you know, inside there, shorten this section, and that's fine now. Now the second thing that they'll tell you on YouTube is this little thing here, this little plastic thing, which the original carburetor doesn't have. Just flip it out, they say. Well, yes you do. Okay, so you flip that out. That's modification 1. Then the next thing you find is that, now where is it? That's the top. Oh, there, that's it. So this carburetor fits in that way. Now this section here, I don't know if you can see that. This section here, I've had to cut away part of that loop there. I mean, you could shorten them little lugs a little bit if you wanted to, but if you don't cut that off, when you go to open and close the throttle, this section hits in the back here, hits on, well that's it, this heat guard. It actually hits on the heat guard, but there's a plastic stiffener that goes behind that, so you'll find that the throttle won't open properly. Okay, but I mean, it's nothing that. I'm probably going to actually just snip off a little bit more of that, to be fair, because I don't want them bits sticking out. So you get yourself a good set of cutters and just cut them off. That's it. Okay. So yeah, you've got to cut that, modify your ram stack, take off your little plastic clip. Also, after I'd fitted it, because I've fitted it, I've now removed it. After I fitted it, when you mount it onto the inlet manifold, I mean that's the inlet manifold, that piece basically goes like that. Okay, so that piece goes like that, that goes like that. Your carburetor mounts onto here. What you will have to do is remove this little stiffener. It has a little brass stiffener that goes into there. Okay, it has a brass stiffener that goes into there like that. But what happens is that the butterfly on the back end, as you're throttling it, catches on this brass stiffener. Okay, so just take that out and it will go on then. What else have I got? Oh yeah, the pulse pipe, which on the original one is this one here. Now on the 372, let me just see if I can get that camera down a bit. I'll show you. So it's that one there, but on the 372, it's this one back here. Okay. Now originally, this pulse pipe on the 372 was about that long, and it was bent about 45 degrees towards the cylinder bore, so it won't fit if you do that. Anyway, I was told just straighten it with a pair of pliers, it'll be fine, just be careful, right? Well, I cracked mine. I cracked mine just there. So the first thing I did, I soldered that back up. It seems to be working okay. And then afterwards I worked out I've got to shorten it, so you have to shorten it like that. Then the other thing you have to do, you have to modify the fuel line and you have to modify the pulse line. Now the pulse line, what you'll have to do is come up with a 90-degree angle piece like that. This is the end that goes onto the carburetor, so you'll have to come out with a 90-degree piece like that to fit it and get it all to work, otherwise your pipe will just pinch up. The same with your fuel line here. I've got a 90-degree piece there, otherwise they'll just foul up and it won't run properly. So yeah, so that's it. I mean, I've been doing it most of the morning, well, late morning. I've got there now. I'll have to put it all back together now though, because obviously I've taken it apart to show you guys. But yeah, so an insight into the CS 580, problems, and upgrade the carburetor. Like I say, well, I'll do another video if I can get a manifold made up. If I can build a decent manifold that works, then I'll strip it down again and I'll show you what I did, because that manifold I know is going to restrict it, even though the carburetor is still going to help a fair bit, but it's not going to be able to run the way it should be able to run with a bigger carburetor. So I'm definitely going to change that manifold, build a decent one, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, I've probably been right through it then. The only thing I won't have done will be advance the ignition timing. I might do that, I don't know, because some people reckon that advancing the ignition timing hasn't really, they've tried it. They normally file the keyway groove out and turn the flywheel a little bit. I probably wouldn't do that. What I'd probably do is try and literally move the coil. If I was going to do it, I might do it just to see if it does make a difference, because this saw it already revs quite a bit higher than it did in standard form, so it might help it. So I might end up doing that, but that'll be like the last modification. Then I'll have been through everything. I've got I'm going to do another video on me short expansion chamber that I built for this saw, which works brilliantly. It does work a little bit different to a traditional expansion chamber, which I can talk about, because obviously it's very short, the whole thing, but it does work really well, but it does work slightly differently. but that'll be for another video. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.